This 18-year-old girl claims she died on Christmas Eve and Jesus showed her how the world ends, including a nuclear holocaust, a global system of control, and the triumph of faith. Her experiences in the afterlife and the shocking revelations about people she trusted will leave you breathless. But it's her sister's ultimate sacrifice and her mentor's dark betrayal that make this story unlike any near-death experience you've heard before. Here's her story in her own words. My name is Gracie Anderson. I never thought I'd be sharing something like this. Just a year ago, I was your typical teenager who questioned everything about faith and blamed God for my sister's illness. But what happened last Christmas changed everything. I died for 7 minutes and 23 seconds. And Jesus himself showed me visions of what's coming, not just the devastation and darkness, but also the light that shines through it all. What I saw about my sister Emily, our local pastor, and my own future still haunts me. But I have to share this testimony because time is running out, and you need to know what's coming. The room spun as I hung the last Christmas ornament on our small artificial tree. Something felt wrong, terribly wrong. The cheerful holiday music playing in the background became distant, like it was being played underwater. I tried to call out to Mom, but my voice wouldn't work. Emily, I whispered, thinking of my sister in the hospital. That's when everything went white. The next thing I knew, I was floating above a city I didn't recognize. The sky was crystal clear until it wasn't. A blinding flash split the heavens brighter than 1,000 suns. In that terrible moment, I watched an entire metropolis disappear. Buildings crumbled like sand castles, streets melted into rivers of fire, and Christmas decorations turned to ash. The air itself seemed to scream in agony. I wanted to close my eyes to look away from the horror unfolding below, but I couldn't. That's when I felt his presence. Warm, powerful, loving, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I knew without turning around that Jesus was standing beside me. This is what happens when the world forgets me, he said, his voice filled with both authority and sorrow. But Gracie, this is only the beginning of what I must show you. I felt tears streaming down my face as I watched shadows of people running in terror, their bodies already marked by death. Why, I managed to whisper, "Why show me this?" "Because you doubted me," he answered gently. "Because you blamed me for Emily's suffering. Because you need to understand that everything, even the darkest moments, serves a greater purpose." The scene before us began to fade, but not before I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. Pastor Michael, our trusted family friend, standing in a fortified bunker, giving orders that would doom millions. "Are you ready to see more?" Jesus asked. All I could do was nod. If this testimony's opening moment stirred something deep within your soul, you're meant to be part of this journey. Subscribe now to witness more profound stories of faith and transformation. Join our community of believers seeking truth in these challenging times. Looking back now, I can see how blind I was before everything happened. My name is Gracie Anderson, and up until last Christmas, I was just another angry 18-year-old who thought she had God all figured out. Funny how death has a way of changing your perspective. I grew up in a small town outside of Portland, where everyone knew everyone else's business, especially at First Baptist Church. Mom tried her best to keep our family involved in the church community, but after Dad left us 3 years ago, my faith started crumbling. The final blow came when my 14-year-old sister Emily was diagnosed with an aggressive form of leukemia. Emily was everything I wasn't: gentle, faithful, always smiling despite the pain that racked her body. Even when the chemotherapy made her hair fall out in clumps, she would just laugh and say, "At least I don't have to worry about bad hair days anymore." But I saw how she suffered. I watched her grow weaker each day, and my anger toward God grew stronger. Pastor Michael was the only one who could reach me during those dark times. He'd been there for our family since Dad abandoned us, helping Mom with bills, bringing groceries when things got tight, and spending hours at Emily's hospital bedside. He wasn't like other pastors I'd known. He was young, maybe early 40s, with kind eyes and a way of explaining faith that almost made sense. Almost. God doesn't cause suffering, Gracie, he would tell me during our long talks in his office. He walks through it with us, but I couldn't accept that. If God was so good, why did he let Emily suffer? Why did he let Dad walk out on us? Why did Mom have to work 2 jobs just to keep us afloat? I started skipping church, then youth group, then Bible study. I deleted all my Christian music and replaced it with angry songs that matched the storm in my soul. Mom would try to talk to me about it, but I'd shut her down. "I don't need fairy tales anymore," I'd snap, watching her face crumple with hurt. The only place I felt any peace was in Emily's hospital room. She never judged me, never tried to force her faith on me. Instead, she would hold my hand and tell me about her dreams, strange, vivid visions she said came from God. "He's preparing us for something big, Gracie," she'd whisper, her blue eyes intense despite the dark circles underneath them. "Something that's going to change everything." I would just shake my head and change the subject. The last thing I needed was my dying sister turning into some kind of prophet. But now I understand what she meant. She knew, somehow. She'd always known. The day everything changed started like any other December morning. Mom was decorating for Christmas, trying to bring some holiday cheer into our increasingly empty house. Emily was having a good day at the hospital. Her numbers were up, and the doctors were cautiously optimistic. But instead of being grateful, I was angry. The cheap artificial tree, the secondhand ornaments, the Christmas carols playing on our ancient radio, it all felt like a mockery of what our life used to be. When Mom asked me to help her hang ornaments, I exploded. "What's the point?" I shouted. "Emily's dying, Dad's gone, and you still want to pretend everything's fine. God doesn't care about us, Mom. He never did." The look on her face should have stopped me, but I couldn't seem to shut up. Years of pain and rage came pouring out like poison. I said things I could never take back, things that would haunt me later when I understood the truth. Little did I know that in less than an hour my entire world would be turned upside down. That my doubt would be replaced by certainty, my anger by understanding, and my bitterness by a purpose so clear and terrifying it would change not just my life but the lives of countless others. But first, I had to die. Pastor Michael stood in our kitchen the morning before my death, his presence as comforting as always. He'd brought another casserole from the church ladies and an envelope I knew contained money, something he'd been doing since Dad left. Back then, I didn't understand why a man of God would care so much about a broken family like ours. "The test results aren't good," he said quietly to Mom, thinking I couldn't hear them from the living room. "But I've been talking with some contacts at Mayo Clinic. There might be a trial treatment that could help Emily." He reached for Mom's hand across the counter, a gesture I'd seen countless times before. "Sarah, let me help. The church has emergency funds." Mom pulled her hand away, pride warring with desperation on her face. "Michael, you've done too much already. The congregation supports you," he interrupted. "They understand what you're going through. What both your girls are going through." His eyes drifted toward me, and I quickly pretended to be focused on my phone. Especially Gracie. That was Pastor Michael, always trying to save us, always seeming to know exactly what we needed. He'd been there the night Dad walked out, holding Mom while she cried. He'd helped Emily with her homework during hospital stays, making her laugh even on her worst days. He'd even tried to counsel Dad before the divorce, though that had obviously failed. To the rest of the congregation, he was a rising star in the Baptist community. Young, charismatic, with a growing online following and speaking invitations from bigger churches. But to us, he was family. The only real father figure Emily and I had left. "Gracie," he called out, making me jump. "Want to grab coffee after you visit Emily today? We could talk." I almost said no. These days our talks always turned to faith, to God's mysterious ways, to accepting things I couldn't change. But something in his voice made me hesitate. He sounded different, urgent, almost. "Sure," I answered, surprising myself. "After lunch." He nodded, relief crossing his features. "Perfect. There's something important I need to discuss with you." Looking back now, I wonder if he knew, if God had somehow warned him about what was coming. The man I saw in my vision, the one giving orders in that bunker, seemed impossible to reconcile with the gentle pastor who'd helped raise me. But then again, none of us knew what we were truly capable of, did we? That afternoon, I never made it to coffee with Pastor Michael. Instead, I had my argument with Mom, collapsed while decorating the tree, and found myself standing with Jesus above a dying world. But sometimes I wonder what he wanted to tell me. What secrets he was carrying behind those kind eyes. The Pastor Michael I knew wrote devotionals about love and forgiveness. He counseled couples, baptized babies, and spent his free time visiting sick church members. He was the one who held my hand during Emily's first round of chemo, who prayed over her when the doctor said there was nothing more they could do. How could that same man become what I saw in my vision? How could someone so good turn so completely to darkness? But then again, isn't that exactly what I had done? Turned my back on faith, on hope, on everything I'd been taught to believe. Maybe Pastor Michael and I weren't so different after all. Maybe we both had to lose everything to understand what really mattered. I just wish I'd known then what I know now. I wish I'd seen the signs, the subtle changes in his sermons, the growing intensity in his prayers, the way he talked about the world's problems needing radical solutions. But I was too wrapped up in my own pain to notice. We all were. The hospital corridor felt colder than usual that December morning. Mom had gone to work straight after our argument, leaving me to handle Emily's morning visit alone. The Christmas decorations in the pediatric ward seemed to mock us, cheap tinsel and paper snowflakes trying to hide the reality of what happened in these rooms. Emily was awake when I arrived, her face pale against the white hospital pillows. She'd lost more weight, her collarbones sharp beneath her hospital gown. But her eyes, those bright blue eyes that matched mine, lit up when she saw me. "You're angry again," she said before I could even sit down. That was Emily, always seeing right through me. "Had a fight with Mom," I muttered, dropping into the chair beside her bed. "About Christmas, about God, about everything." Emily reached for my hand, her skin paper thin and cool to the touch. "Did you yell at her about the tree again?" I felt shame burn in my cheeks. She's acting like everything's normal. Like we should just celebrate while you're stuck here, while Dad's off with his new family, while everything falls apart. "Maybe that's exactly why we should celebrate," she whispered. Her voice was weaker than yesterday, and it scared me. "Gracie, I need to tell you something. I had another dream last night." I tried not to roll my eyes. Emily's dreams had been getting more frequent lately. The doctor said it was probably the medication, but she insisted God was speaking to her. "There's going to be a choice," she said, gripping my hand tighter. "A terrible choice. And you're going to have to be strong. Stronger than you think you can be." "Emily, stop. You're scaring me." "I saw you," she continued, her eyes suddenly intense, standing in light so bright it hurt to look at. "And he was there with you. Jesus, he showed you things, terrible things, but also wonderful things." She started coughing, the sound wet and painful. I reached for her water cup, but she waved it away. "Promise me something," she gasped between coughs. "Promise me that when it happens, when you see what I saw, you'll remember that love is stronger than fear. Promise me you'll tell them all." "Tell who? What are you talking about?" But Emily's eyes were closing, exhaustion overtaking her. The monitors beside her bed started beeping faster, and I saw her numbers dropping on the screen. "I need help in here," I shouted into the hallway. "Somebody help!" The room suddenly filled with nurses and doctors. I was pushed aside, forced to watch as they worked on my baby sister. Through the chaos, I heard her voice, somehow clear despite the weakness I'd heard moments before. "It's okay, Gracie. This is part of the plan, all of it. Even the pain." Those were the last words my sister spoke before she slipped into unconsciousness. As they wheeled her away for emergency treatment, I found myself alone in her room, surrounded by the scattered remains of her Christmas cards and drawings. On her bedside table, her Bible lay open. Without thinking, I picked it up. A verse was underlined in her shaky handwriting, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. Romans 8:28. I slammed the Bible shut, anger and fear churning in my stomach. How could any of this be good? How could this be anyone's purpose? I didn't know then that in less than 2 hours I would collapse in our living room. That Jesus Himself would show me exactly how all these pieces fit together. That Emily's dreams weren't delusions, they were warnings. And that the choice she spoke of would break my heart in ways I never imagined possible. I left the hospital in a daze, barely registering the concerned looks from nurses who'd known our family since Emily's diagnosis. The winter air hit my face, but I couldn't feel it. All I could think about was Emily's voice. "There's going to be a choice." Mom called while I was driving home. "The doctors say she's stabilized," she said, her voice thick with tears. "But Gracie, They're saying we should prepare ourselves. The cancer. It's spreading faster than they thought. I'll decorate the stupid tree, I said abruptly. Maybe it'll make her happy when she comes home. There was a long pause. Honey, the doctors don't think. I said I'll decorate the tree. Mom, I hung up before she could respond. The house was silent when I arrived, the box of ornaments still sitting open where we'd left it. Our artificial tree stood half decorated, a sad testament to our interrupted Christmas. The radio was still playing carols, Joy to the World, mocking me from its tinny speakers. That's when the first wave of dizziness hit. I grabbed the couch to steady myself, but the room wouldn't stop spinning. The Christmas lights blurred into streaks of color, and somewhere far away I heard glass shattering, probably an ornament slipping from my hand. Emily, I tried to call out, forgetting she wasn't there. My legs gave out, and I felt myself falling. The last thing I saw was Pastor Michael's face appearing in our doorway. He must have come to check on us after the hospital called. Then everything went dark. But the darkness didn't last. Suddenly I was floating in a space filled with pure, warm light. It wasn't like the harsh hospital fluorescence or even the bright winter sun. This light felt alive somehow, conscious, loving. Gracie Anderson. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. It filled me with a peace I hadn't felt since before Dad left, before Emily got sick, before everything fell apart. Who I started to ask, but I already knew. How could I not know? Jesus stood before me, though stood isn't quite the right word. He was simply there, his presence more real than anything I'd ever experienced. He wasn't the pale, gentle figure from the church paintings. His eyes held galaxies of wisdom and love, but also an intensity that made me want to look away. You have questions, he said. It wasn't a question. Emily, I whispered. Is she? Your sister sees clearly what many cannot, he answered. But before I show you what is to come, you must understand why it comes. Are you ready to see the truth, Gracie? Not just about the future, but about yourself, about Pastor Michael, about everything you thought you knew. I thought about Emily's last words to me, about her dreams, about the choice she said was coming. Will it hurt, I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. Jesus smiled, and in that smile I saw infinite compassion. Yes, he said simply, the truth often does, but pain can lead to healing if we let it. He held out his hand to me, and I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a scar in his palm, still fresh as if it had just been made. There isn't much time, he said. Your body is dying on your living room floor. Pastor Michael is trying to revive you. Your mother is racing home from the hospital. In 7 minutes and 23 seconds, your heart will start beating again. But what I need to show you, what you need to understand, will feel like an eternity. I looked at his outstretched hand, thinking of Emily's words, love is stronger than fear. I took his hand, and the universe exploded around us. The first vision hit me like a tidal wave. Jesus and I stood in what looked like Times Square, but not the one I'd seen in movies. This version was decorated for Christmas, with enormous trees and light displays that made the usual neon seem dim in comparison. People rushed past us, shopping bags in hand, laughing and taking selfies. Watch, Jesus said softly. The scene shifted subtly at first. I noticed things I'd missed before: the armed guards on every corner, the surveillance drones hovering overhead, the way people's smiles seemed forced. Everyone wore identical silver bracelets that glowed with tiny blue lights. December 24th, 2025, Jesus said, 1 year from today, the last Christmas before everything changes. As if on cue, every screen in Times Square flickered to life simultaneously. Pastor Michael's face appeared on them all, but he looked different, harder somehow. His kind eyes were cold, and he wore a sleek black uniform instead of his usual casual clothes. My fellow Americans, his voice boomed across the square. The time has come for unity, for order, for peace. His words were smooth, practiced, convincing. Today we implement the Universal Safety Protocol. Your government bracelets will now be mandatory. Those who resist will be considered enemies of peace. I watched in horror as chaos erupted. Some people immediately lined up at military checkpoints that seemed to materialize from nowhere. Others tried to run only to be stopped by invisible barriers of energy that sprang up between buildings. Why, I whispered, why would Pastor Michael do this? He believes he's saving humanity, Jesus answered. The road to darkness is often paved with good intentions. The scene shifted again. Now we were in a bunker deep underground. Pastor Michael sat at a massive desk, surrounded by screens showing different cities around the world. He looked older, exhausted, but determined. Sir and Aide approached him. The resistance is growing. More people are refusing the markers. They're saying it's the mark of the beast. Pastor Michael laughed, but there was no humor in it. The mark of the beast. I'm trying to save them. Can't they see? The world is chaos. War is coming. This system is the only way to ensure survival. What happened to him? I asked Jesus. He was good. He helped us. He loved Emily. Watch, Jesus said again. The scene rewound like a movie in reverse. I saw Pastor Michael in his office late at night, crying over reports of war and famine. I saw him being approached by government officials, offered power in exchange for his influence. I saw him wrestling with the decision, praying for guidance. And I saw the moment he convinced himself that control was the same thing as salvation. He chose fear over faith, Jesus explained. But this is not just about Michael. Look deeper. The vision shifted one final time. Now we were in Emily's hospital room, but it was different. Empty. The machines were silent. On the bed lay her Bible, open to a page marked with tears. December 25th, 2024, Jesus said, tomorrow. My heart stopped. No, please, no. Your sister understands what's coming, Jesus said gently. She's been preparing you all along. Her dreams weren't just dreams, Gracie. They were glimpses of what I'm showing you now. I thought of Emily's last words to me. This is part of the plan. All of it. Even the pain. Why show me all this, I asked, my voice breaking. If I can't change it, if Emily's going to, if Pastor Michael's going to, what's the point? Jesus turned to me, his eyes filled with both infinite sorrow and infinite love. Because you have a choice to make, one that will affect not just your family, but countless others. Your sister saw it in her dreams. Now you must see it too. He held out his hand again. Are you ready for the hardest part? I looked at his palm, at the scar that had bled for all humanity's sins, even the ones that hadn't happened yet, even Pastor Michael's, even mine. Will it save her? I whispered. If I make the right choice, will Emily live? Jesus' answer shattered my heart. Sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go. I took his hand again, tears streaming down my face. The hospital room dissolved around us, and I heard Emily's voice in my head one last time, love is stronger than fear. I was about to find out just how much stronger. The next vision unfolded like a photograph developing in reverse. We stood in a massive underground chamber, some kind of sanctuary. Hundreds of people huddled together, singing hymns in whispered voices. The walls were rough-hewn rock, but strings of Christmas lights gave the space a warm glow. 6 months from now, Jesus said, watch. The crowd parted, and I saw Emily walking through them. But not my Emily, not the fragile girl in a hospital bed. This Emily stood tall and strong, her head bare but held high, her eyes blazing with purpose. She moved among the people, touching each one, praying with them. I don't understand, I said. The doctor said. Your sister will be healed, Jesus confirmed, but not in the way you imagine. As if to answer my unspoken question, the scene shifted. Emily stood before Pastor Michael in what looked like a government facility. She was thinner again, but her eyes held the same fire. Just take the mark, Emily, Pastor Michael pleaded. Please, for your sister, for your mother. I can protect you all, but you have to cooperate. Emily's voice was gentle but firm. You taught me once that faith isn't about being safe. It's about being faithful. I'm trying to save lives. By enslaving souls, Emily stepped closer to him. Michael, I see you. The real you. The man who held my hand through chemo. Who brought us groceries when we couldn't afford food. That man is still in there. Pastor Michael's face contorted. Take her to level 3, he ordered the guards. Maximum persuasion. I tried to scream to stop them, but Jesus held me back. She must choose this, he said softly, just as you must choose what comes after. The scene changed again. Emily lay in a cell, her body broken but her spirit unbroken. She was singing the same hymn she used to sing during her treatments, Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound. Why, I sobbed. Why does she have to suffer more? Because some lights shine brightest in the darkest places, Jesus answered. Watch. The guard outside Emily's cell was crying as she sang. In the cell next door, another prisoner joined in. Then another. And another. The hymn spread through the prison like a wave of light. Your sister's choice, Jesus explained, will save more souls than you can imagine. Her faith, her love, her forgiveness, they will break chains that no human power can touch. Then I saw it, the final scene. Emily standing before a crowd of prisoners and guards. Pastor Michael watching from a security monitor, his hands trembling. My sister's voice clear and strong. They can break our bodies, but they cannot break our spirit. They can take our lives, but they cannot take our souls. And to those who hurt us, we say we forgive you, because love is stronger than fear. A guard raised his weapon. Emily closed her eyes, still smiling. No, I screamed. There has to be another way. Jesus turned me to face him, his eyes filled with tears. This is the choice, Gracie. When you wake up, you'll have the power to prevent all of this. One word from you and your sister will take the mark. She'll live. No pain, no prison, no sacrifice. But her soul, I whispered. Now you understand, he said gently. This is what she saw in her dreams. This is what she's been trying to prepare you for. The hardest kind of love isn't protecting someone from pain, it's letting them follow the path they're called to walk, even when that path leads through the valley of the shadow of death. I thought of Emily in the hospital, telling me about her dreams, about the choice, about being strong. Well, I could barely form the words. Will I see her again? Jesus smiled, and in that smile I saw eternity. Faith isn't faith if you know all the answers, but love. Love endures all things, believes all things, hopes all things. The vision began to fade, but before it did, I saw one last scene: Emily in that underground sanctuary, touching lives, bringing hope. And in the shadows, watching with tears streaming down his face, was Pastor Michael. Even the hardest heart can be changed by sacrificial love, Jesus said. Remember that in the days to come. The choice lay before me like a sword: my sister's life or her destiny, her safety or her purpose. I thought of her words, love is stronger than fear. And finally I understood what they meant. The next series of visions came faster, more intense, like flipping through pages of a terrible book. Jesus held my hand as we witnessed the world unraveling thread by thread. 3 months after Emily's choice, he said, and the scene materialized around us. We stood in our church sanctuary, but it was almost unrecognizable. The stained glass windows were boarded up, and armed guards stood at every entrance. Pastor Michael stood at the pulpit, his black uniform gleaming under the harsh lights. The universal safety protocol is not just about survival, he was saying, his voice carrying that same hypnotic conviction. It's about evolution. Humanity has proven it cannot govern itself. We need structure, control, divine intervention through human instruments. I watched in horror as church members lined up to receive their marks, the same glowing bracelets I'd seen in Times Square. Some were crying, others looked relieved. A few slipped quietly toward the exits. Those who resist, Pastor Michael continued, reject not just safety but salvation itself. The scene shifted. We were in a suburban neighborhood. I recognized our neighborhood. Houses were dark, many abandoned. Those still occupied had government symbols painted on their doors. Armed drones patrolled the streets. A family was being dragged from their home, a mother and 3 small children. Their crime: a hidden Bible found during a routine inspection. But they're just children, I whispered. Watch what happens next, Jesus said. A group of shadows moved in the darkness. Suddenly, the guards were distracted by a flash of light from the opposite direction. When they turned back, the family had vanished. I caught a glimpse of a familiar face among the rescuers, one of our church deacons, Mr. Thompson, who'd always seemed so quiet and unassuming. The underground church grows stronger even as persecution increases, Jesus explained. Light shines brightest in darkness. More scenes flashed before us: secret meetings in basements, where people shared smuggled food and whispered prayers, children being taught scripture through coded songs and games, an entire network of safe houses marked with symbols so subtle you'd miss them if you didn't know what to look for. But the darkness was growing too. I saw detention centers filled with those who refused the mark, public executions broadcast as warning, schools where children were taught that individual faith was a form of mental illness. "Your mother," Jesus said softly, and my heart clenched. Mom stood in line at a government center, her face drawn with exhaustion. She was trying to access her bank account, but the scanner kept rejecting her. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Anderson," the clerk said without looking up. "All accounts are now linked to the Universal Safety Protocol, without proper registration." "My daughter is sick," Mom pleaded. "I need to buy her medicine." "Then you know what you need to do." I watched my mother's inner struggle play across her face. The same choice Emily would face. The same choice everyone would face. She turned and walked away, empty-handed but spine straight. "She remains strong," Jesus said. "Your family's faith runs deeper than you knew." The scenes continued, each more heartbreaking than the last. I saw former church members turning in their neighbors, friends betraying friends, fear turning ordinary people into monsters. But I also saw courage. A teenage boy sharing his last piece of bread with a stranger, an elderly couple turning their home into a secret hospital, a group of children memorizing Bible verses late at night, knowing they could be reported by their own classmates. This is what Emily saw, I realized aloud. Why she wasn't afraid. She saw the light shining through the cracks, Jesus confirmed. She saw that every act of cruelty was met with an act of love. Every betrayal answered with forgiveness. This is how my kingdom advances, not through force, but through sacrificial love. The vision shifted one final time. We stood in Pastor Michael's private office. He sat alone, watching security feeds from across the city. His face was haggard, his eyes haunted. On one screen, Emily led a group in prayer in their prison cell. On another, Mom distributed food to hidden refugees. On a third, Mr. Thompson's network rescued another family. "Why won't they just comply?" Pastor Michael whispered. "Why won't they let me save them?" But I could see the doubt creeping into his eyes. The question he wasn't ready to ask: who was really being saved? "Now you begin to understand," Jesus said to me. "The true battle isn't between good people and bad people. It's between love and fear. Between faith and control, between the light I offer and the false security the world offers." I watched Pastor Michael bury his face in his hands, and for the first time I felt something unexpected: compassion. "Can he be saved?" I asked. Jesus smiled. "That's the next part of the story. Are you ready to see how your sister's choice affects even those who seem furthest from redemption?" I nodded, understanding now that these visions weren't just about warning me. They were about preparing me for Emily's choice, for Mom's struggle, for Pastor Michael's journey, for my own role in what was to come. "Show me," I said. And he did. The next vision opened in Pastor Michael's childhood home, a detail I'd never known before. A young Michael sat on his bed, clutching a worn Bible while his parents fought downstairs. Before he was a pastor, Jesus explained, before he was a leader, he was a boy seeking control in a chaotic world. We watched young Michael pray desperately for peace, for order, for someone to make everything make sense. The scene shifted forward: Michael in seminary, brilliant but struggling with doubts. Michael as a new pastor, passionate about helping others find the stability he never had. "The seeds of darkness," Jesus said softly, "often grow from wounded places." The vision accelerated to 6 months before my death experience. Pastor Michael sat in a sleek government office, facing a panel of officials. "Your influence is impressive," one woman said. "Your online sermons about order and divine authority reach millions. We believe you could help us implement the Universal Safety Protocol with minimal resistance." "I don't understand," Pastor Michael replied. What does the government want with a Baptist preacher? We want partnership, Pastor Collins. The world is careening toward chaos. War, famine, social collapse, it's all coming. But with your help, we can establish a new order, one that ensures peace through compliance. I watched the struggle play across his face. And if I refuse? The woman smiled. Then we'll start with your most vulnerable parishioners, the Andersons, for instance. How is young Emily's treatment going? The threat was subtle but clear. Pastor Michael's face hardened, and in that moment I saw the first glimpse of the man he would become. What do you need me to do? The scenes began moving faster. Pastor Michael secretly meeting with government officials. Pastor Michael modifying his sermons to include subtle propaganda. Pastor Michael installing surveillance equipment in the church while his congregation slept. He believes he's protecting us, I realized. The greatest deceptions, Jesus said, often begin with good intentions. But then the vision shifted to Emily's hospital room. Pastor Michael sat beside her bed reading scripture when she suddenly gripped his hand. "I know what you're doing," she whispered. "I've seen it." "Emily, you don't understand. I understand that you're scared, that you want to keep everyone safe, but safety isn't the same as salvation." Pastor Michael's voice shook. "They'll hurt you, your family, everyone I care about." Emily's smile was gentle. Perfect love casts out fear, remember? You taught me that? I watched tears form in Pastor Michael's eyes. I don't know how to stop it now. The things I've set in motion. "It's never too late to choose love over fear," Emily said. "Never too late to remember who you really are." The vision jumped forward again. Pastor Michael stood in his command center watching Emily lead prayers in prison. Her words echoed through the speakers. "We forgive you, all of you, because that's what love does." I saw something crack in Pastor Michael's expression, a hairline fracture in the armor he'd built around his heart. "The system is perfect," he whispered to himself. "The control is perfect, so why isn't it working?" Because Jesus said to me, though Pastor Michael couldn't hear, the human heart wasn't made for perfect control. It was made for perfect love. The final scene showed Pastor Michael alone in his office watching multiple screens. On one, Mom sharing food with refugees. On another, Emily comforting fellow prisoners. On a third, children secretly learning Bible verses. He reached for his tablet, the one that controlled the entire surveillance system, then stopped. "What am I doing?" he whispered. "Dear God, what have I become?" This, Jesus said to me, is the beginning of his redemption, but the price will be high. Are you ready to see what happens next? I thought about the Pastor Michael I knew, the man who'd helped raise me, who'd supported our family, who'd lost his way trying to protect us. Will he find his way back? That depends, Jesus answered, on whether those he's hurt can truly forgive him, whether you can forgive him. The vision began to fade, but not before I saw Pastor Michael fall to his knees, his tablet clattering to the floor. As Emily's voice continued to echo through his office, "Perfect love casts out fear." "Show me the rest," I said. Understanding now that every piece of this story, Emily's sacrifice, Mom's strength, Pastor Michael's fall, and potential redemption, was connected. "Show me how it ends." Jesus took my hand. "First, you need to see how it all begins. Are you ready for what comes next?" I nodded, bracing myself for whatever lay ahead. The vision that followed was different from the others. Instead of watching from a distance, Jesus and I moved through the scenes like ghosts, present in every moment. 8 months from now, he said, and the world materialized around us. We stood in what had once been a subway station, now transformed into an underground sanctuary. Hundreds of people gathered in the dim light, their faces illuminated by scattered candles. I recognized many of them church members, neighbors, even some of Pastor Michael's guards who had turned against the system. Emily stood in the center, her body thin, but her presence powerful. The prison hadn't broken her, it had refined her. "They think they can stop us by forcing us underground," she was saying, "but they forget seeds grow best in the dark." The crowd murmured in agreement. I saw Mom in the front row, tears streaming down her face as she watched her younger daughter lead with such strength. Today, Emily continued, we received word that the marking program is expanding. They're starting with children now. A wave of fearful whispers swept through the crowd. But fear is not our answer, love is. She gestured, and several people stepped forward, carrying backpacks. These contain new identities for the children. Safe routes out of the city. It's not a perfect solution, but it will give them a chance. Emily's voice grew stronger. We may not be able to fight their armies, but we can save their souls one act of love at a time. The scene shifted. We were in dozens of places at once: safe houses where families sheltered refugees, secret schools where children learned scripture through songs, hidden medical clinics where the unmarked could receive care. The underground church grows stronger, Jesus explained, not through force but through sacrificial love. I watched in amazement as the network expanded. Every act of cruelty by the authorities was met with an act of kindness by the faithful. Every new restriction sparked new ways of showing love. Then we were in Pastor Michael's command center again. He stared at his screens, watching all of this unfold. His face showed the battle raging within him. Sir, an aide reported, the underground network is growing faster than we can track. Every time we shut down one location, 3 more appear. Because we're fighting the wrong thing, Pastor Michael whispered, so quietly only he could hear. We're fighting love itself. The scene shifted again. Emily stood before a group of new believers in the underground sanctuary. Many of them were former guards, former informants, former enemies. Your past doesn't define you, she told them. Your choices today do. We've all been deceived, we've all made mistakes. But love offers a new path. I watched as hardened faces softened, as tears fell, as healing began. This is how the kingdom comes, Jesus said to me. Not through power, but through forgiveness. Not through control, but through love. But then the vision darkened. Alarms blared through the underground sanctuary. Someone had betrayed them. They're coming, the cry went up as heavy boots thundered on the stairs. I expected panic, but instead I saw something remarkable. The people formed circles around the children, around the elderly, around the weak. They began to sing hymns. Emily's voice rose above the chaos. Remember, whatever happens, love is stronger than fear. The doors burst open. Armed guards poured in, and in their midst, looking more haunted than ever, stood Pastor Michael. But something was different about him. He stared at the scene before him, hundreds of people singing in the face of death, protecting each other, showing no hatred even now. Stop, he whispered. Then louder, stop. The guards froze. Pastor Michael stepped forward, his eyes locked on Emily. You were right, he said, his voice breaking. All this time you were right. He reached for his wrist where his own marker glowed. With trembling fingers he began to remove it. An aide grabbed his arm. Sir, what are you doing? Pastor Michael's voice grew stronger. What I should have done months ago. What love demands. He pulled off his marker and dropped it to the ground. The room held its breath. Every eye was fixed on this moment. The great persecutor faced with the power of the love he'd tried to destroy. Emily stepped forward, her arms open. Welcome home, Michael. But before he could respond, shots rang out. The aide who had grabbed him barked orders and chaos erupted. This, Jesus said to me as the vision began to fade, is where the real battle begins. Are you ready to see what true sacrifice looks like? I watched Emily standing firm as the guards advanced, still singing, still loving, still unafraid. Show me, I whispered. The vision shifted violently, like a camera being yanked through time and space. We stood in what remained of our church sanctuary, but now it was different, transformed into a makeshift tribunal. 1 year from today, Jesus said quietly, Christmas Eve. I saw myself standing before a panel of officials, Pastor Michael among them. But this was a different version of me, stronger, surer, marked by months of underground resistance. Racy Anderson, a voice rang out. You stand accused of harboring unmarked citizens, distributing illegal religious materials, and inspiring rebellion against the Universal Safety Protocol. The me in the vision stood straight, unafraid. I watched myself smile, the same gentle smile I'd seen so often on Emily's face. My sister taught me, my future self said, that truth doesn't need defense. It only needs witnesses. Pastor Michael stepped forward, his face a mask of conflict. Gracie, please, don't make me do this. Just take the mark. For your mother's sake, if nothing else. You know I can't, my future self replied. You know why? The scene expanded and I saw what my future self could see: hundreds of hidden believers watching through the church's security feeds that they'd hacked. Mom among them, her face proud despite her tears. Former guards who'd been converted through Emily's sacrifice. Children we'd helped escape the marking program. Your sister's death changed nothing, one official spat. The system remains. Order remains. My sister's death changed everything, my future self responded. It showed us that love is stronger than any system. That faith outlasts fear. That light shines brightest in darkness. Jesus turned to me, the present me, watching all this unfold. Do you understand now? This is your choice, not just whether to let Emily follow her path, but whether to follow your own. The scene continued. I watched my future self being led away, still speaking truth to power. But something unexpected happened. As the guards reached for me, Pastor Michael suddenly moved. Wait, he called out. His voice shook but grew stronger with each word. If you arrest her, you'll have to arrest me too. The room froze. One of the highest officials in the system, choosing to stand with the resistance. Michael, his aide, hissed. Think about what you're doing. I have thought about it. For months. Every time I watched these believers choose love over safety. Every time I saw them forgive those who persecuted them. Every time I remembered Emily's last words to me. He pulled off his marker and let it clatter to the floor. Emily Anderson died showing me what real faith looks like. Her sister lives showing me what real courage looks like. I choose their way. Chaos erupted. Guards rushed forward. But something remarkable happened. Other officials began removing their markers too. The revolution that Emily's sacrifice had sparked, that my future self had nurtured, finally burst into full flame. The system isn't perfect, my future self called out above the chaos. It was never meant to be. Because perfection isn't found in control, it's found in love. The vision began to fade, but not before I saw what happened next. Believers emerging from hiding, gathering around Pastor Michael and my future self, forming a circle of protection, their voices raised in the same hymn Emily had sung in her prison cell. This is how it begins, Jesus said. The end of fear's power. The triumph of love. But it all starts with a choice, your choice tomorrow morning in that hospital room. Emily knew, I whispered. She saw all of this. She saw the path of love, yes, and chose to walk it, knowing the cost. Now you must choose whether to let her. The vision faded completely, but the hymn lingered in my ears, the same one Emily always sang, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. Are you ready, Jesus asked, to see what happens next? To see the full cost and the full triumph of choosing love over fear. I thought of Emily's courage, of Pastor Michael's redemption, of my own future strength. Yes, I said. Show me everything. The next vision was the hardest to watch. We stood in Mom's hospital break room 3 months after my experience. She sat alone, staring at a government notice in her trembling hands. All medical personnel must register with the Universal Safety Protocol within 48 hours. Jesus read aloud. No exceptions. I watched as Pastor Michael entered the room, his face heavy with the burden of what he had to say. Sarah, he began softly. You know I don't want to do this. Mom didn't look up. Emily needs her treatment, Michael. Without my job, without the insurance. Take the mark, he pleaded. Just take it. For Emily, I can make sure she gets the best care, the newest treatments. She doesn't have to. He couldn't finish the sentence. Mom's voice was quiet but firm. That's what you were going to say, isn't it? My daughter doesn't have to die. The break room fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. I saw the weight of the choice crushing my mother, her daughter's life versus her soul's conviction. Emily won't take it, Mom finally said, even if I do. You know that. Pastor Michael sat heavily in the chair across from her. She's just a child, Sarah. We can make her understand. No, Mom's voice cracked. She understands better than any of us. She always has. The scene shifted. We were in Emily's hospital room. Mom sat by the bed, holding my sister's thin hand. "I won't take it, Mom," Emily whispered. "And you shouldn't either. Baby, without the treatments." "I'll be with Jesus." Emily's smile was radiant despite her pain. "And you'll be free to help others. Isn't that worth more than a few more months?" I watched my mother break. All the strength, all the determination that had carried her through Dad's abandonment, through Emily's illness, through countless hardships, it all crumbled in the face of this impossible choice. "I can't lose you," she sobbed. "Not like this. Not when there's a way." Emily pulled her close. "You're not losing me, Mom. You're letting me go home. And someday when all this is over, we'll be together again. All of us." The scene shifted one final time. Mom stood in the hospital administration office, her resignation letter in hand. Her supervisor, a kind-faced woman who'd worked with her for years, was crying. "Sarah, please. Think about what you're doing. Think about Emily." "I am thinking about Emily," Mom said quietly. "I'm thinking about the kind of world I want her to live in, however long that might be. A world where we don't trade our souls for safety." She placed her badge on the desk. As she turned to leave, her supervisor called out one last time. "What will you do? How will you live?" Mom paused in the doorway, the same way the early Christians did, the same way believers have always done when the world turns dark. We'll trust God, love each other, and choose faith over fear. Jesus turned to me as the vision faded. "Your mother's choice sets everything in motion. Her example inspires others in the hospital to resist. A network forms underground medical care for the unmarked. Hope spreads." "But Emily," I couldn't finish. "Sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go." Jesus repeated his earlier words. "Your mother learns this, you must learn it too." I thought of the visions I'd seen Mom working in secret clinics, helping other families, her faith growing stronger through her sacrifice. "Was it worth it?" I whispered. Jesus' answer was gentle but firm. "Ask the hundreds who find courage through her example. Ask the souls who choose faith over fear because she showed them how. Ask Emily when you see her again." "When I see her again," I repeated, clinging to that promise. "Are you ready to see what happens next?" Jesus asked. "To witness both the cost and the triumph of your family's choice?" I nodded, understanding now that every sacrifice, every choice was part of a larger story, a story of love overcoming fear, of faith defeating control, of light piercing darkness. "Show me," I said. The final moments came in flashes of light and shadow. Jesus held my hand as we watched Emily in her prison cell the night before everything changed. She sat on her narrow bed, writing letters, dozens of them. Her body was weaker without treatments, but her eyes shone with an otherworldly light. Letters of forgiveness, Jesus explained softly, to every guard, every official, every person who chose fear over love, including Pastor Michael. I moved closer, reading over her shoulder. "Dear Michael, when you read this, I'll be gone, but I want you to know that I forgive you. More importantly, God forgives you. The man who taught me about faith is still inside you. The light hasn't gone out, it's just waiting to shine again." The scene shifted. Dawn broke over the detention center. Guards came to escort Emily to her final interrogation. But something was different. They moved hesitantly, avoiding her eyes. Some were crying. "They read her letters," Jesus said. "She spent her last night thinking of their salvation." In the interrogation room, Pastor Michael waited. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Last chance, Emily," he whispered. "Please. For your sister. For your mother. For me." Emily stood, somehow looking taller than her physical height. "For all of you," she said gently, "I have to say no." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The order was given. Guards raised their weapons. But Emily began to sing that same hymn one last time. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." Other voices joined in, prisoners in nearby cells, guards who couldn't hold back anymore, even some of the officials. The hymn spread through the detention center like a wave of light. Pastor Michael's face crumpled. "Emily, I know," she smiled. "I forgive you. Now forgive yourself." The shots rang out. But in that moment, something extraordinary happened. As Emily fell, a literal light seemed to fill the room, not from the fluorescent bulbs above, but from within her. Every person present saw it. Every person felt it. "The light shines in the darkness," Jesus quoted softly, "and the darkness has not overcome it." Pastor Michael fell to his knees. Guards dropped their weapons. And through the security feeds that had been meant to monitor prisoners, the entire scene was broadcast to underground gatherings across the city. I watched my mother watching the feed in a hidden sanctuary, tears streaming down her face but her back straight with pride. I watched myself in another safe house, gathering children around me to shield their eyes but not their ears, letting them hear how faith sounds when it triumphs over fear. And I watched as Emily's light, that inexplicable glow, spread through the security cameras, through the underground networks, through the hearts of everyone who witnessed her final moment of perfect love. "This is what real power looks like," Jesus said. "Not control, not fear, not force. This is how my kingdom comes." The scene faded to white, but not before I saw Pastor Michael reaching for his marker with trembling hands, saw other officials doing the same, saw the beginning of the transformation that Emily's sacrifice would spark. "She changed everything," I whispered. "Love always does," Jesus replied. "When it's chosen freely, when it's lived fully, when it's offered sacrificially, love changes everything." The vision began to fade, but Emily's voice lingered, singing through many dangers, toils, and snares, "I have already come." "Are you ready?" Jesus asked gently, "to see what happens next? To see how her sacrifice bears fruit? To see how love truly conquers fear?" I wiped my tears away, understanding now why Emily had been so peaceful in the hospital, why she'd tried to prepare us all. "Show me," I said. "Show me everything." In the aftermath of Emily's death, the visions showed me a transformation I never expected. We stood in Pastor Michael's private quarters, watching him pace through the night, Emily's letter clutched in his trembling hands. "Read it again," Jesus said softly. "Listen to what love sounds like." Pastor Michael's voice broke as he read Emily's words aloud. "Michael, I know you remember the day you taught me about grace. I was scared of my first chemotherapy treatment. And you told me that God's strength shows up best in our weakest moments. You were right, but it wasn't just about cancer. It was about this moment, this choice. Your strength is about to show up in your weakest moment too." The scene shifted. We watched Pastor Michael enter the control center the next morning, his eyes red but clear. On every screen, underground gatherings were growing. Emily's final moments had been shared thousands of times through the Resistance's hidden network. Serenade reported, "The number of people removing their markers has tripled since yesterday. What are your orders?" Pastor Michael stared at the screens. In one feed, my mother treated unmarked children in a secret clinic. In another, former guards who'd witnessed Emily's death were helping families escape the city. "My orders," he whispered. "Then stronger, my orders are to tell the truth." Before anyone could stop him, he began typing. On every screen, his message appeared. "My name is Michael Collins. I was wrong. I thought I could save people by controlling them. I thought fear could create peace. But yesterday I watched a 14-year-old girl with more courage than I've shown in my entire life. She taught me that real peace only comes through love." Alarms blared. Guards rushed in. But Pastor Michael kept typing, his message broadcasting across the entire network. "Emily Anderson died showing us what real faith looks like. She died forgiving the people who killed her, including me. This system isn't protection, it's prison. And I choose to stand with those who've chosen love over fear." The guards reached for him, but stopped short. On every screen, people were gathering. Not just the Resistance now, but ordinary citizens. Marked and unmarked alike, drawn by the raw truth of his confession. "This is how redemption looks," Jesus explained. "Not in grand gestures, but in simple truth. In choosing love even when it costs everything." We watched as Pastor Michael was arrested, stripped of his position, thrown into the same cells where he'd imprisoned others. But something had changed. The guards who brought him food were the same ones who'd heard Emily sing. The prisoners he'd condemned now shared their blankets with him. "I don't deserve this," he told one former guard who secretly brought him water. "That's what grace means," the guard replied. "Emily taught us that." The scene shifted one final time. Pastor Michael knelt in his cell praying, but unlike his childhood prayers for control and order, these words were different. "God, I don't ask for safety anymore. I ask for courage, the courage Emily had. The courage to choose love over fear, truth over security, faith over control." "Watch," Jesus said to me. A light began to fill the cell, the same light that had surrounded Emily in her final moments. Pastor Michael looked up, tears streaming down his face. "I understand now," he whispered. "I finally understand." The vision began to fade, but not before I saw what happened next. Pastor Michael's cell becoming a gathering place, his confession spreading hope throughout the detention center, his transformation inspiring others to question their own choices. This is why Emily smiled, I realized. She saw this too. She saw love doing what force never could. Jesus confirmed, changing hearts one at a time. The light grew brighter, reminiscent of Emily's final moments. "Are you ready to see how it ends?" Jesus asked. "How one girl's choice to love without limits changes everything." I nodded, understanding now that Emily's death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a seed planted in darkness, growing into something beautiful. "Show me," I said. The final visions came like waves of light, each one brighter than the last. Jesus and I watched as the movement Emily sparked spread beyond anything the authorities could control. 1 month after Pastor Michael's confession, Jesus said, and the scene unfolded. The underground sanctuaries were overflowing now, not just with the unmarked, but with marked citizens removing their devices, choosing faith over security. Emily's story and Pastor Michael's redemption had awakened something that no system could suppress. We stood in the largest gathering, hidden beneath an abandoned shopping mall. Mom was there, treating the sick. Pastor Michael, recently freed by converted guards, stood among those he once persecuted, sharing his testimony. "I thought I was saving the world," he told the crowd. But Emily Anderson showed me what real salvation looks like. It looks like love that refuses to hate, like faith that fears nothing but losing its soul, like a light that shines brightest when darkness thinks it's won. The scene shifted rapidly, showing similar gatherings across the city, the country, the world. The system that had seemed so powerful was crumbling, not through violence or force, but through the quiet courage of people choosing love over fear. "Watch what love does," Jesus said softly. I saw guards removing their uniforms, officials destroying their databases, families reuniting as the walls of fear came down. The transformation wasn't just external, you could see it in their faces, the same light that had surrounded Emily now shining in their eyes. In the detention centers, former prisoners and guards prayed together. In the government offices, officials who had enforced the marking system now worked secretly to dismantle it. In homes across the city, people opened their doors to strangers, sharing what little they had. "This is what Emily saw," I whispered. "This is why she could smile even at the end." She saw the victory of love Jesus confirmed, not just over the system, but over the fear in human hearts. The final scene showed a Christmas Eve service 1 year after Emily's death. The underground sanctuary was packed, but not with fear or secrecy anymore. The light that had started with one young girl's choice now filled the room, visible on every face. Pastor Michael stood at the makeshift pulpit, reading from Emily's final letter. Perfect love casts out fear, not through power or control, but through sacrifice. Through choosing to love even when it costs everything. As he read, people began to sing the same hymn he had sung in her final moments. But now it wasn't just a song of defiance or courage. It was a song of triumph. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. The voices rose, marked and unmarked alike, former enemies now family, fear transformed into faith. "This is how it ends," Jesus said, not with force conquering force, but with love defeating fear, with light overtaking darkness, with truth setting people free. I watched as the light grew brighter, filling the sanctuary, spilling out into the streets above, a visible reminder of what one person's choice to love without limits could do. Emily knew, I said, understanding at last. She knew her death would bring life to others. As all true love does, Jesus replied. This is the pattern of my kingdom: death bringing life, sacrifice bringing freedom, love conquering fear. The vision began to fade, but the song continued, echoing through time, connecting Emily's last moments to this moment of triumph. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, we have already come. 'Twas grace that brought us safe thus far, and grace will lead us home. Are you ready, Jesus asked gently, to see how your part in this story ends, to understand why I showed you all of this? I nodded, thinking of Emily's courage, Pastor Michael's redemption, Mom's faithfulness, and the triumph of love over fear. Show me, I said. Show me everything. The final vision faded, and suddenly I was back in that space of pure light where my journey with Jesus had begun. But I wasn't the same person who had started this journey. Everything had changed. 7 minutes and 23 seconds have passed in your world, Jesus said softly. Your mother is almost home. Pastor Michael is still trying to revive you. But you understand now, don't you, why I showed you all of this? I nodded, tears streaming down my face. Emily's going to die, but her death will save so many others, and I have to let it happen. That's only part of it, Jesus replied. What else did you learn? I thought about everything I'd seen, the darkness and the light, the fear and the love, the endings that became beginnings. I learned that love really is stronger than fear, I said slowly. That one person choosing to love without limits can change everything. That what looks like defeat can be victory if we trust enough. Jesus smiled, and in that smile I saw the same light that had surrounded Emily in her final moments. When you wake up, he said, you'll remember everything. The choice will still be yours. You could try to change what's coming, try to save Emily from her path, or I can trust I finished. Like she does, like Mom will, like even Pastor Michael eventually learns to do. It won't be easy, Jesus warned, watching her fade, knowing what's coming, carrying this truth. I thought of Emily in her hospital room, already somehow knowing, already at peace. She's been carrying it all along, hasn't she? That's why she's never afraid. Jesus nodded. And now you know why. Are you ready to go back? To begin your part of the story? I took a deep breath. Will I see you again? His smile was gentle. I never left. Even in the darkest moments you saw, I was there. I'll be there for what's coming too. The light began to fade. I could hear Mom's voice calling my name, feel Pastor Michael's hands performing CPR. Remember, Jesus said as the vision faded, perfect love casts out fear. Emily understood that. Soon others will too. Through you, I whispered. Through all of you, he corrected. Now go, begin. The light disappeared, and I felt myself falling back toward my body, back toward the choice that would change everything. My eyes flew open. Mom was crying, holding my hand. Pastor Michael sat back, relief washing over his face. Christmas music still played softly in the background. Gracie, Mom sobbed. Oh, thank God. I looked at them both, really looked at them, seeing not just who they were, but who they would become. Mom, who would choose faith over security. Pastor Michael, who would lose everything to find his soul again. I saw him, I whispered. Jesus. He showed me. I stopped, remembering everything. The visions felt like they had taken days, but the clock showed only minutes had passed. Emily was still in the hospital. The future was still unwritten. The choice was still mine. Mom, I said, sitting up slowly, we need to go to Emily. At the hospital, Emily's face lit up when we entered. She took one look at me and knew. You saw it too, didn't you? She asked quietly. I nodded, tears falling. She reached for my hand. Then you understand why we have to let it happen, she said. All of it. Mom looked between us, confused. Pastor Michael stood in the doorway, not yet the man he would become, but no longer quite the man he had been. Emily, I began, but she squeezed my hand. It's okay, Gracie. Perfect love casts out fear, remember. I looked at her, my little sister, who had always been stronger than me, and saw the light that would soon change everything. "I love you," I whispered. "I love you too," she smiled. "All of you. And that's why this is worth it." Mom didn't understand yet, but she would. Pastor Michael didn't know his path yet, but he would. And I finally understood mine. We spent that Christmas together, our last as a complete family, but also our first as something new, something stronger. We sang carols, shared memories, and loved each other without reservation. Emily's light was already shining, touching everyone who entered her room, and when she smiled at me, I could see Jesus' smile too. The future was still coming, the darkness, the choices, the sacrifices. But now I understood what Emily had known all along: light shines brightest in darkness. Love grows strongest through sacrifice. Faith proves truest through trials. As we gathered around Emily's bed that Christmas Eve, I remembered Jesus' words, "Perfect love casts out fear." Looking at my family, at who we were and who we would become, I finally understood what that meant. This wasn't an ending, it was a beginning, and love would win. Thank you for staying with us through this powerful testimony. If you were moved by Gracie and Emily's story of faith, love, and sacrifice, please take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear how this story touched your heart or changed your perspective. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring testimonies and stories of faith. By hitting that subscribe button, you're supporting our mission to spread hope and light in dark times. If you believe others need to hear this message, please share this video with your friends and family. Every like helps us reach more people with stories of God's love and grace. Together we can remind the world that love truly is stronger than fear. God bless you all, and remember, in your darkest moments, light still shines.